He
You
threw the
actually
pen
thought you'd
across
get
the
half,
table and
didn't
laughed
you?
in her face.
Pathetic.
You are nothing without me, Elena. Just a poor gardener's daughter lucky enough to breathe my air. Marcus Sterling thought he had just won. He thought divorcing his pregnant wife and leaving her with nothing but $12 and the clothes on her back was the end of her story. He thought wrong. What Marcus did not know was that the simple gardener who just died was not just planting flowers for the past 15 years. He was planting a time bomb that would expose a murder Marcus committed to build his billion-dollar empire.
Looks
A
like
time
we've caught
bomb
everything,
hidden in a
Marcus.
safety
You
deposit
can't do
box
this
that
to me.
Marcus would do anything to destroy. But here is what makes this story different. Elena does not win because she is secretly rich. She does not win because some man saves her. She wins because when you push a pregnant woman to the edge, when you take everything she has, when you threaten her unborn child, you awaken something far more dangerous than any billionaire. You awaken a mother. This is the story of how a woman with nothing defeated a man with everything. How she survived betrayal, psychiatric imprisonment, and a labor that started at the worst possible moment. And how the man who mocked her signature on those divorce papers watched his entire world collapse when a judge read her father's will. Stay with me until the end, because the twist that destroys Marcus Sterling is not what you think it is. And the final scene will remind you why you should never underestimate the woman you threw away. He threw the pen across the mahogany table and laughed in her face. You are nothing without me, Elena. Just a poor gardener's daughter lucky enough to breathe my air. Marcus Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, his platinum watch catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. From the 40th floor of Sterling Tech headquarters, Chicago sprawled beneath him like a kingdom. His kingdom. And Elena Vance Sterling, his wife of 3 years, sat across from him like a peasant awaiting judgment. Elena kept her hands folded in her lap, resting on the swell of her 7-month pregnant belly. She wore a simple gray cardigan that had seen better days and a pair of faded jeans. No designer labels, no diamonds. Nothing that said she had ever been married to one of the most powerful men in the city. Marcus checked his watch for the 3rd time in 60 seconds. Well, are you going to sign it, or are you going to sit there wasting my time? I have a merger meeting at 2, real business, something you wouldn't understand. Standing beside Marcus was Arthur Webb, his corporate attorney. Arthur slid the thick stack of documents across the table toward Elena. The paper made a harsh scraping sound against the polished wood. Mrs. Sterling, Arthur said, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy. As discussed, this is a clean break. You received no alimony, no claim to the Sterling properties in the Hamptons or Aspen, and no stock options. In exchange, Mr. Sterling agrees to absorb the debt accrued on your shared credit cards, which I might add is minimal since you rarely spent money. Marcus let out a laugh that bounced off the glass walls. She did not spend money because she did not know how to be a Sterling. I gave her a black card and she bought groceries at the discount market. It was embarrassing, Arthur, truly embarrassing. Elena did not look up. Her eyes were fixed on the bold letters at the top of the page. Decree of dissolution of marriage. 3 years of her life reduced to legal terminology and signature lines. I just want my maiden name back, Elena said softly. Her voice was steady, though her heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Take it. Marcus laughed again, that cruel barking sound she had grown to dread. Vance, God, it even sounds poor. It smells like fertilizer. He leaned forward, his eyes glittering with malice. How is your father, by the way? Still pruning hedges for the neighbors in Queens? Elena's hand tightened around the cheap ballpoint pen she had brought from her purse. Marcus did not know. She had not told him. When she had tried to call him last week, sobbing to tell him that Silas Vance had passed away in his sleep, Marcus had declined the call. He had texted her back 3 words. In a meeting, stop bothering me. He is gone, Marcus, Elena whispered, signing her name on the dotted line. Elena Vance. Marcus stopped laughing for a split second. An awkward silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Then he shrugged, adjusting his silk tie. Well, saved me a sympathy card. He was a strange old man anyway, always looking at me with those judging eyes, like he knew something I did not. Turns out he knew nothing except how to dig dirt. Elena finished the last signature. She pushed the papers back across the table. She stood up slowly, one hand supporting her lower back, the other smoothing down her cardigan. She looked small in the vast glass-walled office that overlooked the city skyline, a skyline Marcus claimed he owned. "It is done," she said. Marcus snatched the papers, flipping to the back page to ensure her signature was there. A grin spread across his face, predatory and relieved. Finally, he breathed out. "Arthur, file these immediately. I want the record to show I am a single man by happy hour." He looked up at Elena, his eyes narrowing with something that looked almost like disappointment, as if he had expected more of a fight, as if breaking her had been too easy. "You know, I should feel bad. I am kicking you out onto the street with nothing. But honestly, Elena, you were dead weight. You were a passenger in a Ferrari. It is time you learned to take the bus." Elena walked to the door. She paused, her hand on the cold steel handle. She turned back, her brown eyes locking onto his. For the first time in 3 years, she did not look submissive. She did not look scared. She looked at him with something that made his smile falter. "Pity. Be careful, Marcus," she said quietly. "The view from the top is beautiful, but the fall is fatal." "Get out," he sneered. She left. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, sealing her out of his life forever. Or so he thought. Elena stepped into the elevator, grateful to be alone. The doors slid closed, and she caught her reflection in the polished steel. Mascara running, belly huge, divorce papers crumpled in her trembling hand. "Well, kid," she said softly, looking down at her stomach. "Day one of our new life. Could be worse." The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Standing there, waiting to get on, was Jessica Thorne, executive assistant to Marcus Sterling. Blonde, beautiful, draped in designer silk and wearing diamonds that caught the light of the lobby chandeliers. In her hand was a bottle of champagne. Jessica's eyes traveled from Elena's tear-streaked face to her pregnant belly to the divorce papers clutched in her fist. A slow smile spread across her perfect red lips. "Oh," she purred, "are we celebrating? How lovely." Elena said nothing. She stepped past Jessica, who made no effort to move aside. Their shoulders brushed. "It is worse," Elena muttered under her breath as she walked toward the exit. "It is so much worse." Behind her, she heard Jessica's laugh echo through the marble lobby. The sound followed her out onto the street, mixing with the noise of Chicago traffic and the first drops of what would become a torrential downpour. Elena stood on the sidewalk, rain beginning to soak through her cardigan. She had no umbrella, no car, no home to go to. She had $12 in her wallet and a baby due in 2 months. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like her father whispered words he had told her when she was a little girl, crying over some schoolyard slight. "The storm always passes, Elena. Always. You just have to be strong enough to stand in it." She took a deep breath. She started walking. She did not know yet that her father had left her something far more valuable than money. She did not know that the simple gardener who had spent his life with dirt under his fingernails had been guarding a secret that would bring Marcus Sterling's entire empire crashing down. She did not know that the real storm had not even started yet. The doorman would not let her in. Elena stood in the rain outside the building she had called home for 3 years, water streaming down her face, and listened to a man in a uniform tell her that she was no longer welcome. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm sorry." The doorman's name was Gerald. He had always been kind to her. He would not meet her eyes now. Mr. Sterling called ahead. "Your access has been revoked. Security is packing your personal items. They will be shipped to your new address." "I do not have a new address," Elena said. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "Well, they will be shipped somewhere. I am sure Mr. Sterling's lawyers will figure it out. Can I at least get my prenatal vitamins? They are in the bathroom cabinet." Gerald's face twisted with genuine regret. "I am sorry, ma'am. I have my orders." Elena stared at the glass doors of the building. Through them, she could see the warm glow of the lobby, the marble floors she had walked across 1,000 times, the elevator that led up to the penthouse where she had slept beside a man who had never loved her. All of it, close to her now. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you, Gerald." She turned and walked away. Gerald called after her. "Mrs. Sterling?" "Elena?" She did not look back. The ATM was 3 blocks away. By the time Elena reached it, her cardigan was soaked through and she was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering. She inserted her debit card with shaking hands. Card declined. She tried again. Maybe she had entered the PIN wrong. Her fingers were numb from the cold. Card declined. She pulled out her credit card, the black card Marcus had mocked her for never using. Card canceled. Elena stood in front of the ATM, rain drumming against the plastic shelter above her head, and felt the last pieces of her life falling away like leaves stripped from a tree in a hurricane. She called the bank. The automated system made her verify her identity 3 times before connecting her to a human being. Mrs. Sterling, the bank representative, said, in a voice that was polite but fundamentally unhelpful. The joint account was closed this morning by the primary account holder. The credit cards linked to that account have been canceled. I have $12, Elena said. Her voice cracked. I am 7 months pregnant. Can you help me? I am sorry, ma'am. There is nothing I can do. The line went dead. Elena leaned against the ATM enclosure, pressing her forehead to the cold metal. She had been so stupid. For 3 years, she had let Marcus handle all the finances. He had assured her it was easier that way, more efficient. He knew about money, and she did not need to worry her pretty little head about it. Every financial advisor she had ever read about said the same thing. Keep your own account, even in marriage. Never let anyone else have complete control over your money. She had not listened. She had trusted him. And now she had nothing. Elena pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her thumb hovered over the name Megan. Megan had been her best friend since college. They had been bridesmaids at each other's weddings. Surely Megan would help her. She pressed call. It went to voicemail. Elena tried again. Voicemail again. She sent a text. I need help. Marcus and I are done. Can I stay with you? 3 dots appeared. Someone was typing. Elena held her breath. The dots disappeared. A minute passed. 2 minutes. 5. Then a text came through. Elena, I am sorry about your situation, but Marcus is a major investor in David's startup. We cannot get involved. I hope you understand. Elena stared at the screen until the rain made the words blur and swim. She understood perfectly. Money trumped friendship. Loyalty had a price tag, and she could not afford it. She walked until she found a bus stop with a bench and a partial shelter from the rain. She sat down heavily, her belly making the simple act of sitting feel like a production. Around her, the city rushed by, cars splashing through puddles, people hurrying past with umbrellas. No one looked at the pregnant woman on the bench. In a city of millions, she was completely invisible. She was homeless. She was broke. She was alone. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. For a wild moment, she hoped it was Megan calling from a different phone, or maybe someone from the bank saying there had been a mistake, or even Marcus calling to say he had changed his mind, that he did not want the divorce after all. She answered, Elena Vance? The voice was male, older, unfamiliar. Yes, this is Robert Caldwell. I was your father's attorney. Elena closed her eyes. Of course, her father's affairs needed to be settled. Funeral arrangements, whatever debts he had left behind. Because even in death, Silas Vance would probably find a way to cost her money she did not have. Mr. Caldwell, this is not a good time. I understand. I know this is a difficult time. But your father left specific instructions. I need to see you immediately. It is about his will. Elena let out a bitter laugh that startled a pigeon near her feet. His will? He was a gardener. What did he leave me? His rake? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Robert Caldwell spoke again, his voice was lower, more urgent. Ms. Vance, your father left you a key, and a letter that I think you need to read before anyone else finds out it exists. Elena opened her eyes. Something in his tone made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. What kind of letter? Not over the phone. Can you meet me at my office? I will text you the address. I do not have money for a cab. Take the bus. I will wait as long as you need. He hung up. A moment later, her phone buzzed with an address on the south side of town. Elena sat on the bench for a long moment, watching the rain fall. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. And something in Robert Caldwell's voice had sounded like hope, or maybe like fear. She stood up, checked the bus schedule on her phone, and started walking to the nearest stop. Robert Caldwell's office was above a laundromat in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Elena climbed the narrow staircase, one hand on the railing and the other pressed against her aching lower back. By the time she reached the top, she was out of breath and her feet were throbbing. The door was marked with a small brass plaque. Robert Caldwell, attorney at law. She knocked. Come in. The office was small and cluttered, every surface covered with stacks of paper and manila folders. Behind a desk that looked like it dated from the 1950s sat an old man with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when Elena entered, moving around the desk to offer her a chair. Miss Vance, please sit. You must be exhausted. Elena sank into the offered chair gratefully. The cushion was worn and the springs creaked, but it was the most comfortable she had felt in hours. Robert Caldwell did not return to his seat behind the desk. Instead, he sat in a chair beside her, close enough that she could see the worry lines etched deep into his face. Before we begin, Robert said, I need to ask, does anyone know you are here? No, Elena frowned. Should someone know? No, Robert said quickly. That is good. That is very good. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. The paper was thick and cream-colored. On the front, in handwriting she recognized instantly, was her name. Elena. This is from your father. He gave it to me 3 months ago with very specific instructions. I was to give it to you only if something happened to him, and only in person. Never over the phone, never by mail. Elena took the envelope with trembling hands. Something happened to him. He died of a heart attack. Robert's expression flickered. Did he? What do you mean? Open the letter, Ms. Vance. Elena slid her finger under the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her father's handwriting filled the page, the letters cramped and careful, the way he always wrote when something was important. She began to read. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry I could not tell you this while I was alive. I was afraid. Afraid for you, afraid of what Marcus Sterling might do if he knew. 15 years ago, my best friend Daniel Reeves created something revolutionary. A software patent that would change the tech industry. He trusted the wrong person with it. That person was Marcus Sterling, who was just a junior developer back then. Daniel did not commit suicide, Elena. Elena's hands started shaking so badly the paper rattled. I know this because the night before he died, Daniel came to my house with a box. He said, Silas, if anything happens to me, this box will prove what really happened. I should have gone to the police. I did not. I was scared. Marcus was already becoming powerful, and I had a daughter to protect. But I kept the box. It is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 1247. The key is with this letter. Elena looked up at Robert. He held out a small brass key. She took it, then continued reading. I am sorry I could not give you money or a house or an easy life, but I can give you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. But Elena, be careful. Marcus has killed before to protect his secrets. He will do it again. I love you. I am proud of you. I am sorry. Dad. The letter fell from Elena's hands. It drifted to the floor like a falling leaf. Is this real? She whispered. Robert Caldwell's face was grim. I do not know what is in that box. Your father made me promise not to open it. But Elena, 2 days after your father wrote that letter, someone broke into his house. They did not take anything valuable. They just went through his papers. He called me terrified, said he thought they had found out. Elena's mind was racing, and 3 days later, he died in his sleep. The death certificate says heart attack. My father had the healthiest heart his doctor had ever seen. He was 68 years old and could still outrun me. Robert nodded slowly. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Elena stared at the key in her hand. Such a small thing, just a piece of metal, and yet it might hold the power to destroy the man who had just destroyed her life. What do I do? She asked. Robert stood up and walked to the window, peering through the dusty blinds at the street below. That is your choice. But whatever you decide, you need to decide quickly. If Marcus Sterling finds out that key exists, if he finds out your father kept evidence all these years, he trailed off. He will come for me, Elena finished. He will come for you, and he will not stop until he gets what he wants. Elena pressed her hand against her belly. She felt the baby kick, a flutter of movement that reminded her she was not alone, that she was fighting for more than just herself. So, Robert said, turning back to face her, what are you going to do? Elena looked at the letter on the floor. She looked at the key in her hand. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, a pregnant woman with nothing to her name except a secret that could bring down an empire. I'm going to do what pregnant women do best, she said. I'm going to waddle into danger, make terrible decisions, probably cry a lot. She stood up, tucking the key into her pocket. But first, I need to find somewhere to sleep that is not a bus stop. Robert smiled, a small, sad smile. There is a shelter 3 blocks east. It is not much, but they will take you in for the night. Tomorrow we can figure out how to get you into that safety deposit box. Thank you, Elena said, for keeping his secret all these years. Your father was a good man, Robert said. He was just trying to protect you. Elena nodded and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. Mr. Caldwell, why are you helping me? If Marcus is as dangerous as you say, why risk yourself? Robert's eyes met hers. Because I was Daniel Reeves' friend, too, and because some debts can only be paid with truth. Elena stepped out into the hallway and began the slow walk down the stairs. Behind her, Robert Caldwell closed his office door, and then he picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. It is done, he said quietly. She has the key. She is going to the bank tomorrow. On the other end of the line, a voice she would have recognized asked a single question. Where is she now? Robert told him. And just like that, Elena Vance walked out into the night, not knowing that she had been betrayed before she even had a chance to fight. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of Chicago morning that seeps into your bones and makes you question every decision you have ever made. Elena had barely slept. The thin cot in the women's shelter creaked every time she moved, and her mind refused to stop racing. Her father was murdered. Her husband was a killer. And somewhere in a bank vault across town was proof of everything. Around her, other women stirred in their beds. A mother with 2 children, a teenager who looked too young to be here, an elderly woman who coughed through the night. Each of them had a story. Each of them had hit bottom. Elena was just the newest member of the club. She got up before dawn, splashed water on her face in the communal bathroom, and caught her reflection in the cracked mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin, 7 months pregnant and looking like she had aged 10 years in 2 days. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. You are stronger than you know, little seed. Storms make roots grow deeper. She hoped he was right. The first bus to downtown left at 5:30. Elena sat in the back watching the city wake up through smudged windows. Office buildings began to glow. Early commuters hurried along sidewalks. The world kept spinning, indifferent to her crisis. First National Bank was imposing, all marble columns and brass fixtures and security guards in crisp uniforms. The lobby smelled like money and importance. Elena felt small and shabby in her day-old clothes, her pregnancy stretching the fabric of her cardigan. But she walked through the front doors like she belonged there. Fake it until you make it. That was what her college roommate used to say. Right now, Elena was faking everything. I need to access safety deposit box 1247, she told the woman behind the customer service counter. The woman looked her up and down. Her eyes lingered on Elena's worn clothes, her messy hair, her pregnant belly. The judgment was subtle but unmistakable. One moment, please. She picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it, too quietly for Elena to hear. The baby kicked. Elena pressed her hand against her stomach. It is okay, she whispered. We are almost there. A man in a suit approached. His name tag read Franklin Matthews, branch manager. His face wore an expression of professional regret, the kind of look people practice in mirrors before delivering bad news. Ms. Vance? Yes. I'm afraid there is a problem. Elena's heart sank. What problem? There is a legal hold on that box. A court order was filed this morning by Sterling Tech's legal team, citing an ongoing intellectual property investigation. We cannot grant you access until the hold is lifted. This morning? Elena's voice cracked. That is impossible. No one knows about this box except... She stopped. The blood drained from her face. With trembling hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out Robert Caldwell's business card. She had not looked at it closely yesterday. She had been too overwhelmed, too grateful to have someone on her side, too desperate to believe that help had finally arrived. Now she turned it over. On the back, in tiny print, were words that made her stomach lurch. Sterling Tech Legal Services of Counsel. The card fell from her fingers and fluttered to the marble floor. Robert Caldwell worked for Marcus. He had worked for Marcus all along. The kindly old lawyer who had seemed so sympathetic, who had called her specifically, who had told her about the key and the letter and then sent her straight into a trap. Ms. Vansua, the bank manager, was looking at her with concern. Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Elena could not speak, could not breathe. The lobby seemed to tilt around her. She had walked right into a trap. She had told Marcus's spy exactly where the evidence was, and now it was locked away, maybe forever. I need to go, she managed. She turned and walked toward the exit, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might fall. The security guard held the door open for her. She barely noticed. Outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. She made it 3 steps before her phone rang. Unknown number. She knew who it was before she answered. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could ignore it. She could throw the phone in the trash and disappear. But she needed to hear him say it. She needed to know for certain. She answered, "Hello, sweetheart." Marcus's voice was warm and pleasant, like they were old friends catching up over coffee, like he had not just destroyed her last hope. I hear you have been asking questions about things that do not concern you. Elena looked around wildly. Was he watching her? Was someone following her? The crowds of commuters suddenly seemed threatening. Any one of them could be working for him. How did you know? She asked. Robert Caldwell has worked for me for 15 years. Marcus chuckled. Your father thought he was a friend, thought he was some kind of crusader for justice. But friends can be bought, Elena. Everyone has a price. You should know that by now. My father trusted him. Your father was a fool. Marcus's voice hardened, dropping the pretense of friendliness. And so are you if you think you can threaten me with whatever fairy tales the old man dreamed up before he died. Let me be very clear about your situation. He paused. Elena heard him take a breath, savoring the moment. If you continue down this path, you will not just lose the baby, you will lose everything, including your life. The line went dead. Elena stood frozen on the sidewalk. People walked past her, busy with their own lives, checking their phones, sipping their coffees, completely unaware that a pregnant woman was standing in their midst with a target on her back. A businessman bumped her shoulder and did not apologize. A mother pushed a stroller around her without making eye contact. In a city of 3 million people, Elena had never felt more alone. For a long moment, she considered giving up. She could walk away, disappear somewhere far from Chicago, where Marcus Sterling could not find her. Start over with a new name in a small town where no one knew her story. She could raise her baby in peace. She could forget about justice and revenge and focus on survival. It would be so easy, so safe. But then she remembered her father's face, the way he smiled when he worked in his garden, the way he called her his little seed, the way he had spent 15 years carrying a burden that was not his to carry, all to protect her. And she remembered the man whose death had started all of this, Daniel Reeves, a man with a wife, with children, a man who had created something brilliant and been murdered for it by someone he trusted. If she gave up now, both of them would have died for nothing. Elena looked down at her belly. She felt her daughter kick, a strong flutter of movement that seemed to say, I am here. I am counting on you. Okay, baby, she said quietly. New plan. We are not running. We are fighting. She started walking. She did not know where she was going. She did not know who she could trust. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Marcus Sterling had made a mistake. He had assumed she would break. He had assumed that threatening her would send her scurrying into the shadows. He had no idea who he was dealing with, and that was going to cost him everything. The free clinic on the south side of Chicago was not much to look at. Peeling paint on the walls, plastic chairs in the waiting room, half of them cracked or stained, the smell of disinfectant barely covering something worse underneath, fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered like they were fighting to stay alive. But it was the only place Elena could afford to get prenatal care. And after the stress of the past 48 hours, she knew she needed to make sure the baby was okay. The waiting room was packed. A young mother tried to quiet a crying toddler. An elderly man coughed into a handkerchief. A teenage girl with a black eye stared at the floor. Everyone here had a story of how life had knocked them down. Elena took a number and waited. 3 hours later, she sat in an examination room, a paper gown crinkling every time she moved. The room was small and sparse. A poster on the wall showed the stages of fetal development. Another listed warning signs of domestic abuse. Elena stared at that poster for a long time. The door opened and a nurse walked in. She was around 60, with dark skin that glowed with health despite her age, warm brown eyes that had seen everything, and an expression that suggested she was not impressed by any of it. Her scrubs were covered in cartoon elephants, a cheerful contrast to her no-nonsense demeanor. Her name tag read Ruth Coleman, RN. Elena Vance? Ruth checked her chart. 7 months along. First pregnancy, no recent checkups. She looked up, her eyes sharp. Honey, when was the last time you saw a doctor? About a month ago. That is too long. You know that, right? I know. Things have been complicated. Ruth wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Elena's arm and started pumping. Complicated, that is one word for it. She studied Elena's face while the cuff inflated. You look like you have been through a hurricane. When did you last eat? Yesterday, maybe the day before. I'm not sure. Ruth's eyebrows rose. She said nothing, but her silence was louder than words. She checked the reading on the blood pressure monitor, and her frown deepened. 142/94. That is way too high for a woman in your condition. You stressed about something? Elena let out a laugh that sounded more like a saw. Something cracked inside her. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the kindness in Ruth's voice, the first genuine kindness she had experienced in days. Or maybe she had just reached the point where holding it together was no longer possible. My husband left me for his secretary, she heard herself say. I am homeless. Broke. I have $12 to my name and nowhere to sleep tonight. And apparently my dead father left me evidence of a murder committed by said husband. But I cannot access it because his lawyer, who I thought was helping me, turned out to be working for my husband the whole time. So now the evidence is locked away, my husband is threatening to kill me, and I do not know what to do or who to trust or how I am supposed to bring a baby into this mess. She stopped, took a breath, realized she was crying. Sorry, she whispered. I do not usually. I am sorry. Ruth had stopped writing on her chart. She stared at Elena for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she did something unexpected. She set down her pen, she pulled up a chair, and she sat down so she was at Elena's eye level, close enough that Elena could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Did you say Sterling? Ruth asked quietly. As in Marcus Sterling? Elena's heart stuttered. You know him? Ruth was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, older. My son Tommy was an accountant at Sterling Tech. Good job, good pay. First person in our family to graduate from college. And he did it with honors from Northwestern. He thought he had made it, thought he was living the American dream. What happened? He discovered some irregularities in the books. Money being funneled to offshore accounts. Fake invoices, evidence of massive fraud. Millions of dollars being stolen from the company and hidden in places where no one was supposed to look. Elena leaned forward. What did he do? He reported it. Internally, through the proper channels. Ruth's voice was bitter now. Thought the company would want to know they were being robbed. Thought he was being a good employee, a good citizen. 3 weeks later, he was fired. Performance issues, they said. Never mind that he had perfect reviews for 4 years. Never mind that he had just gotten a promotion. And when he tried to go public, Marcus Sterling's lawyers buried him. Defamation suits, restraining orders. They hacked his social media and planted evidence of things he never did. They destroyed his reputation so thoroughly that no one would hire him. Ruth's hands clenched into fists. My son, who graduated top of his class from one of the best business schools in the country, is now working at a gas station. He lives in my basement. He barely leaves the house. He used to be so full of life, so ambitious. Now he just exists. Elena felt sick. I am so sorry. Ruth waved off the sympathy. It is what it is. I have spent 3 years watching my son give up on himself. 3 years of anger with nowhere to put it. She leaned closer, her eyes intense. But when I heard that name, Sterling, Something in me woke up. She paused. You said your father had evidence? Evidence that Marcus Sterling is a murderer? Elena hesitated. She had already trusted one person today and been betrayed. How did she know Ruth was not another trap? How did she know Marcus had not planted her here, waiting for Elena to walk through the door? But something in Ruth's eyes was genuine. The anger, the pain, the desperate need for justice that Elena recognized because she felt it herself. She made a decision. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it would blow up in her face, but she was out of options and out of time. She told Ruth everything. The letter, the key, Robert Caldwell's betrayal, the court order locking away the evidence, Marcus's threat on the phone, the way he had laughed when he told her that everyone has a price. When she finished, Ruth was quiet for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Then Ruth stood up and walked to the door. Elena's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. She is going to call security. She is going to have me committed. She's going to... Ruth locked the door, turned around, and smiled. It was not a gentle smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed a weapon. Here is the thing about people like Marcus Sterling, Ruth said. They think they own the system. They think their money and their lawyers and their connections make them untouchable. They think they can crush anyone who gets in their way. She walked back to Elena and sat down again. But the system is not the only game in town, and money cannot buy everything. Sometimes it cannot buy the one thing that matters most. What is that? People who have nothing left to lose. Ruth reached out and took Elena's hand. Her grip was warm and strong. First things first, you need a place to stay. My guest room is not fancy, but it is dry and safe, and the door has 3 locks on it. Second, you need food. You are eating for 2, and you look like a strong wind would knock you over. I cannot ask you to. You did not ask. I am offering. Ruth's voice was firm. And third, we need to figure out how to get that evidence without going through the front door. Elena felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of despair. Why? She asked. Why are you helping me? You do not even know me. Ruth squeezed her hand. Because that man took my son's future. And because when you have been knocked down as many times as I have, you learn to recognize someone who needs a hand up. She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. Besides, I have always wanted to take down a billionaire. Seems like a good way to spend my retirement. For the first time in days, Elena felt something other than despair. She felt hope, and she felt something else too. Something she had almost forgotten existed. She felt like she was not alone. Ruth Coleman's house was a small bungalow on a quiet street in the South Shore neighborhood. The paint was peeling and the porch steps creaked and the gutters needed cleaning. But the yard was neat, with flower beds that showed someone cared. And when Ruth opened the front door, Elena was hit with the smell of something cooking on the stove, warm and savory and impossibly welcoming. Make yourself at home, Ruth said. Bathroom is down the hall. Guest room is upstairs, second door on the right. Clean towels in the closet. Elena stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. The house was small but immaculate. Family photos covered every wall. A worn Bible sat on the coffee table. A cross hung above the fireplace. It felt like a home, a real home, something Elena had not had in longer than she could remember. Thank you, she whispered. I do not know how to. You can thank me by eating. Ruth was already in the kitchen, stirring something in a large pot. Sit down. Food will be ready in 5 minutes. Elena sat at the kitchen table. It was covered with a cheerful yellow tablecloth and set with mismatched dishes that somehow looked perfect together. Through the window, she could see a small backyard with a vegetable garden, the plants brown and dormant for winter. Eat, Ruth commanded, setting a bowl of soup in front of her. Every drop. Elena picked up her spoon. The first taste made her eyes close. Chicken soup, rich with vegetables and herbs and something she could not identify. It was the best thing she had eaten in months. What is in this? Family recipe. Ruth sat down across from her. My grandmother made it. My mother made it. Now I make it. Supposed to cure everything from the common cold to a broken heart. Elena ate. She had not realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful hit her tongue. Within minutes, she had finished the entire bowl. Ruth refilled it without being asked. The back door opened and a young man walked in. He was in his late 20s, tall and lean, with his mother's warm eyes and a wary expression that suggested life had not been kind to him lately. He wore a gas station uniform with the name badge Tommy stitched on the chest. "Tommy," Ruth said, "this is Elena. She needs our help." Tommy Coleman looked at Elena. His expression was unreadable. Guarded, the look of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust strangers. "Sterling's wife," he said flatly. "Ex-wife. As of yesterday." Tommy pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. He did not touch the soup his mother set in front of him. "My mother says you have evidence that could take him down. I have a key to a safety deposit box that might contain evidence. The box is under a court order. I cannot access it." Tommy nodded slowly. "And Robert Caldwell is the one who betrayed you?" "Yes." Something flickered in Tommy's eyes, recognition and anger. "Robert Caldwell was the lawyer who handled my wrongful termination case. He said he was working pro bono to help whistleblowers, said he believed in justice for the little guy. Turns out he was working for Sterling the whole time, making sure the complaints went nowhere, making sure people like me got buried." Elena felt sick. He has been doing this for years, pretending to help people while feeding information to Marcus. How many others has he betrayed? Does not matter. Ruth set another bowl of soup in front of Tommy and pushed it toward him until he finally picked up his spoon. "What matters is that Marcus is scared. If he is going to this much trouble to bury the truth must be powerful enough to destroy him." Tommy ate in silence for a moment. Then he looked up. "You said the safety deposit box is at First National. The one downtown?" "Yes, box 1247. I know someone who works there. Katie Morrison. We went to high school together. She is in the records department. Can she help us? Not directly, but she might be able to tell us more about the court order, who filed it, what the exact legal grounds are, whether there are any cracks we can exploit. Oh, I shall much. If we can find a weakness in the order, we might be able to get it overturned." Elena's heart began to race. "And if we cannot, then we find another way." Tommy's jaw set with determination. For the first time, Elena saw something other than defeat in his eyes. "My mother spent 3 years watching me give up. She never stopped believing I could fight back, never stopped pushing me to stand up again." He looked at Ruth. Something passed between them. Love, frustration, hope. "I think it is time I proved her right." Ruth beamed at her son. "There is my boy." Over the next few days, Elena's ragged team began to take shape. Katie Morrison came through. She confirmed that the court order on the safety deposit box was filed by Arthur Webb, Marcus's personal attorney. The grounds cited were ongoing intellectual property investigation, which was vague enough to be almost meaningless. But here was the interesting part. The judge who signed the order was Harold Finch, and Harold Finch's re-election campaign had received $200,000 from a PAC funded entirely by Sterling Tech. "That is a conflict of interest," Elena said when Tommy shared the news. "He should have recused himself." "Should have," Tommy agreed, "but did not. Rich people play by different rules, and proving the conflict would take months of litigation. Months we do not have. There has to be another way," Ruth insisted. There was. On the 4th day, Elena got a phone call from a blocked number. She almost did not answer. She was afraid it was Marcus again. Afraid of what new threat he might deliver, what new way he might have found to hurt her. But something made her swipe accept. Elena Vance, the voice was female. Professional, cold as steel. "Who is this?" "My name is Carla Hayes. I am a detective with the Chicago Police Department. Cold Case Division." Elena gripped the phone tighter. Her heart began to pound. "Cold case? I have been investigating the death of Daniel Reeves for 10 years. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. Unofficially, I have never believed that. Something about it never added up." Hayes paused. "And yesterday, someone filed a court order to seal a safety deposit box connected to your father's estate. The timing struck me as very interesting, almost like someone is trying to hide something." Elena's pulse was racing now. "How did you find me? I am a detective. It is my job to find people who do not want to be found." Detective Hayes paused again. "I think we should meet. I think we might be able to help each other. How do I know I can trust you? You do not. But ask yourself this. You have been betrayed by a lawyer. You are being hunted by a billionaire. You have nowhere to turn and no one to help you. At this point, what do you have to lose? Elena thought about it. The detective had a point. Where do you want to meet? Detective Carla Hayes was not what Elena expected. She was around 50, with steel gray hair cut short and practical. Her face looked like it had never smiled, all sharp angles and hard lines. Her eyes missed nothing. They swept over Elena, cataloging every detail, filing away information for later use. They met at a diner on the north side. Neutral territory, cracked vinyl booths, and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Ruth came along for backup, sitting at a nearby booth pretending to read a newspaper. Her presence made Elena feel braver. Elena slid into the seat across from the detective. Neither of them ordered anything. This was not a social visit. "Tell me about Daniel Reeves," Elena said. Hayes pulled a folder from her bag and laid it on the table. It was thick, stuffed with papers and photographs and handwritten notes. "Daniel Reeves," Hayes began, "brilliant software engineer, one of the best minds of his generation, developed a revolutionary data compression algorithm in 2008. The kind of thing that could have changed the industry. He filed for a patent on March 15th. Hayes opened the folder, revealing crime scene photos that made Elena's stomach turn. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his garage. Carbon monoxide poisoning. His car was running. The garage door was closed. The official ruling was suicide. But you do not believe it was suicide. No, Hayes tapped one of the photos. Daniel Reeves was a devout Catholic. Went to Mass every Sunday. Confession every week. Suicide is a mortal sin. His wife says he never would have done it. Not in a million years. That is not proof. No. But this is." Hayes pulled out another document. Daniel Reeves had just filed for a patent that would have made him millions. He had no debt, no history of depression, no motive whatsoever to kill himself. He had a wife he adored and 2 children he lived for. He was planning a vacation to Disney World the week after he died. So what happened? Hayes leaned forward. Her eyes were intense. 3 months after Daniel's death, a young developer named Marcus Sterling filed a nearly identical patent, different enough to avoid legal challenges, similar enough to be suspicious. That patent became the foundation of Sterling Tech. It made Marcus Sterling a billionaire. Elena felt cold. He killed Daniel and stole his work. That is my theory. Hayes closed the folder. But I have never been able to prove it. Every time I get close, something happens. Witnesses disappear. Evidence goes missing. My cases get reassigned. Someone has been protecting him. Someone powerful. Hayes smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. But now we have something new. Your father's safety deposit box. Lena's heart sank. But I cannot get to it. There is a court order. Court orders can be challenged, especially when they were issued by a judge with a clear conflict of interest. I have a contact at the state attorney's office. She owes me a favor. A big one. Hayes pulled out her phone. If we can prove that Judge Finch had financial ties to Sterling Tech, we can get the order overturned. It will take time, but it can be done. How long? A week, maybe 2. Elena's hand went to her belly. I might not have 2 weeks. Marcus is looking for me. He threatened to kill me. Then we work fast. Hayes stood up. In the meantime, keep your head down. Do not use credit cards. Do not go anywhere Marcus might expect you to go. And do not trust anyone you have not personally vetted. I have Ruth and Tommy. Hayes glanced at Ruth, who looked up from her newspaper and gave a small nod. They are good people. Keep them close. Hayes looked back at Elena. I will be in touch. And Elena, be careful. Marcus Sterling has gotten away with murder for 15 years. He will do anything to keep it that way. Detective Hayes left. The bell above the door chimed as she walked out. Elena sat in the booth for a long moment, her mind racing. She had allies now. A plan, a chance. But Marcus had money, power, connections everywhere. This was going to be the fight of her life. Ruth came over and slid into the seat across from her. Well, Elena took a deep breath. I think we might actually have a chance, Ruth grinned. That is the spirit. Now let us get you home before anyone notices you are gone. They left the diner together, 2 women with nothing in common except a shared enemy and a stubborn refusal to give up. They did not notice the woman watching them from across the street. Blonde, beautiful, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, a coffee cup in her manicured hand. Jessica Thorne took a photo with her phone and sent it to a number she knew by heart. The text read, "She has help now, a detective. What do you want me to do?" The response came seconds later. "Keep watching. Find out everything about the detective. And be ready. This is about to get interesting." The next 7 days were a blur of secret meetings, legal maneuvering, and constant fear. Detective Hayes worked her contacts. She called in favors from people who owed her. She dug through financial records and campaign contributions and property deeds, building a case against Judge Finch one document at a time. Tommy dug through public records, tracking every dollar Sterling Tech had ever donated to political campaigns. He found connections no one else had seen. Shell companies, hidden transfers, a web of corruption that spread further than anyone had imagined. Ruth kept Elena fed and sane. She made sure Elena went to her prenatal appointments. She made sure she got enough sleep, even when Elena's mind would not stop racing. She became the mother Elena had lost years ago, fierce and protective, and unwilling to let her give up. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to win. On day 5, Hayes's contact at the state attorney's office confirmed the smoking gun. Judge Finch had received over $200,000 in campaign contributions from Sterling Tech. More importantly, he had a vacation home in Aspen, a vacation home that was purchased the exact same month he signed the order sealing Elena's safety deposit box. The title was in his wife's name, but the money came from a shell company that traced back to Marcus Sterling. "That is corruption," Tommy said, barely containing his excitement. "That is actual, provable, send him to prison corruption." On day 6, Hayes filed a motion to unseal Box 1247, citing judicial misconduct. On day 7, the motion was granted. Elena stood outside First National Bank, the key clutched in her hand, and felt tears streaming down her face. The same building that had turned her away a week ago now stood with its doors open, ready to give her what she needed. Ruth stood on one side of her, Tommy on the other. Detective Hayes waited by her car, ready to take whatever was in that box directly into evidence. "Are you ready?" "Ah, yeah, no. You're ready?" Ruth asked. Elena nodded. She could not speak. Her throat was too tight. She walked through the glass doors. The same bank manager who had turned her away greeted her with a nervous smile. "Miss Vance, right this way, please." 15 minutes later, Elena emerged holding a metal box. Inside was a video camera. Old. The kind that used actual tapes. Technology from another era. And beside it was a tape, labeled in handwriting she did not recognize, but somehow knew belonged to Daniel Reeves. For Silas, for the truth. They went to Hayes's office, a cramped space in a building that had seen better days. Hayes dug an old VCR out of a closet, blowing dust off the top. "Have not used this in years," she muttered, connecting cables. "Let us hope it still works." It did. Daniel Reeves appeared on screen. He looked tired, scared, but determined. He sat in what appeared to be a home office, bookshelves visible behind him, family photos on the desk. "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said. "Today is March 28th, 2008. If you are watching this, I am probably dead. This video is my insurance policy. My proof of what Marcus Sterling did to me and what he is planning to do." For the next 45 minutes, Daniel laid out everything. The algorithm he had created. How Marcus, then a junior developer at the same firm, had befriended him, gained his trust, pretended to be his mentor and his friend, and then began threatening him. He said if I did not give him the patent, he would destroy my family. Daniel's voice cracked on the recording. He said he knew people, dangerous people. He said accidents happen all the time. He said my wife might have a car accident, my kids might get sick. He said no one would ever connect it to him. The video showed documents, emails, recordings of phone calls where Marcus made explicit threats. And then, at the end, Daniel looked directly into the camera. His eyes were red from crying, but his voice was steady. "If something happens to me, Marcus Sterling is responsible. I am giving this to my best friend, Silas Vance, because he is the only person I trust. Silas, if you are watching this, please do not let him get away with it. Please. For my wife, for my children, for everyone he will hurt if he is not stopped." The screen went black. The room was silent except for the hum of the old VCR. That is it, Hayes said quietly. That is everything we need. Elena was crying, Ruth was crying, even Tommy had tears in his eyes, and he had not cried since he was 12 years old. What happens now? Elena asked. Hayes picked up her phone. Her face was set with grim satisfaction. Now I call the district attorney, and tomorrow morning, Marcus Sterling gets arrested for the murder of Daniel Reeves. That night, they celebrated at Ruth's kitchen table. Pizza from the place down the street. Sparkling cider because Elena could not drink. And laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from relief and hope, and the belief that maybe, just maybe, the good guys were finally going to win. Elena went to bed feeling lighter than she had in years. She had done it. They had done it. Tomorrow Marcus would be in handcuffs. Tomorrow she could finally start rebuilding her life. Tomorrow everything would be different. She fell asleep with her hand on her belly, dreaming of the future she would build for her daughter. At 3 in the morning, she woke to pounding on the door. Ruth was already up, standing in the hallway in her bathrobe, her face pale. Detective Hayes stood on the porch. Rain dripped from her coat. Her expression was grim enough to stop Elena's heart. Elena, Hayes said, we have a problem. Elena's blood ran cold. What happened? Someone leaked that we have the video. I do not know who, but Marcus's lawyers filed an emergency motion claiming the evidence was obtained illegally through judicial misconduct in the original unsealing. They are arguing that since Judge Finch was corrupt, anything that came from his ruling is fruit of the poisonous tree. But that is not how it works. I know, but a federal judge, not Finch, bought it anyway. He just signed an order. What order? They are seizing everything. The video, the documents, all of it. It goes into federal custody pending a full investigation. That could take months, years, maybe forever. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. No, she whispered. No, 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 no. Hayes was not finished. Her face got even grimmer. There is more. Marcus's lawyers also filed an emergency petition with family court. They are claiming you are mentally unstable, a danger to your unborn child. They submitted affidavits from Robert Caldwell saying you made delusional statements about murder and conspiracy theories. What? There is a psychiatric evaluation scheduled for tomorrow morning. If you fail it, they can force you into a facility until the birth. And if that happens, Marcus can petition for emergency custody the moment the baby is born. Elena could not breathe. She gripped the door frame, her knees threatening to buckle. He is trying to take my baby. He is trying to take everything. Hayes's voice was hard. And right now, legally, he is winning. The evidence was gone. The victory was gone. And now Marcus was coming for the only thing she had left, her child. The psychiatric evaluation was held in a room designed to make people feel crazy. Fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to be annoying. Gray walls, no windows, a two-way mirror that reflected Elena's terrified face back at her. She sat across from a court-appointed psychiatrist, a thin man with a thin smile and eyes that never seemed to blink. His name was Dr. Bernard Shaw, and everything about him screamed that he had already made up his mind. Behind the mirror, she knew Marcus's lawyers were watching, taking notes, looking for anything they could use against her. Mrs. Sterling, Dr. Shaw said, tapping his pen against his notepad, do you believe your husband killed someone? Elena had been coached by Hayes on what to say. Stay calm. Do not sound paranoid. Give measured, reasonable answers. But the words felt like ash in her mouth. I believe there is evidence that needs to be properly investigated. But you believe he is capable of murder? I believe anyone is capable of anything under the right circumstances. Dr. Shaw made a note, his pen scratched loudly in the silent room. And these claims about your father leaving you secret evidence of a conspiracy. Do you have proof of these claims? The proof was seized, as you know, so you are saying you believe something based on evidence that no longer exists? Does that not strike you as concerning? It was a trap. Every question was designed to make her sound delusional, paranoid, unstable. And the worst part was, if Elena had not lived through it herself, she might have agreed with him. The evaluation lasted 2 hours. At the end, Dr. Shaw set down his pen and folded his hands. Mrs. Sterling, I am not going to commit you to a psychiatric facility. Elena let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. However, Dr. Shaw continued, I do have concerns about your mental state, the stress you are under, The beliefs you hold. I am recommending a 72-hour hold for observation. You will remain in the hospital where we can monitor you and ensure the safety of your unborn child. You cannot do that. I can, and I am. Dr. Shaw stood up. The guards will escort you to your room. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to fight, wanted to run, but there were guards outside the door, and she was 7 months pregnant, and she had no one who could help her. She went quietly. The hospital room was nicer than the evaluation room, but it was still a prison. She could not leave, could not contact anyone except through monitored phone calls, could not do anything but lie in bed and listen to the beep of the monitors tracking her baby's heartbeat. She was allowed one phone call. She called Ruth. I thought I could fight him, Elena whispered into the phone. I thought if I just had the truth, I could win. But he owns the system, Ruth. He owns the judges, the lawyers, the doctors, everything. How do you fight someone who owns everything? Ruth's voice was fierce. You fight dirty. You do not play his game. You change the game entirely. I do not know how. Listen to me carefully. When the legal system fails you, and it will fail you because it was built to protect people like Marcus Sterling, there is still another court, the court of public opinion. What do you mean? I mean that rich men like Marcus care about their image more than anything else in the world. They care about their reputation, their legacy, their name. Destroy that, and you destroy them. Elena closed her eyes. Even if I could do that, I am stuck in here. You let me worry about that. Ruth's voice softened. You just rest. Take care of that baby. And trust me. Can you do that? Can you trust me? Elena thought about it. She had trusted Robert Caldwell, and he had betrayed her. She had trusted the legal system, and it had failed her. But Ruth had taken her in when she had nothing, fed her when she was hungry, fought for her when everyone else looked away. Yes, Elena said. I trust you. Good. Now rest. We have work to do. The line went dead. Elena lay in the darkness, one hand on her belly, and tried to trust. While Elena was trapped in the hospital, Ruth and Tommy went to war. Tommy created a TikTok account that night. His first video was shaky and unrehearsed. He sat in his mother's kitchen, looking exhausted, and started talking. Okay, so basically this billionaire ruined my life and also might be a murderer, and I thought you guys should know. He squinted at the phone. Wait, is this thing recording? Oh, he almost deleted it. It looked terrible, unprofessional. Nothing like the polished content that usually went viral. But something made him post it anyway. The raw authenticity made it explode overnight. He did not release the seized evidence. He did not have it. But he told the story. His story. How Marcus Sterling had destroyed his career for reporting fraud. How he had lost everything. How he had spent 3 years wanting to give up. And then he asked people to share their stories. The comments exploded. Hundreds of people came forward. Other employees who had been silenced, contractors who had been cheated, women who had been harassed and paid off, an entire network of victims who had been too scared to speak until someone else went first. Tommy made another video, and another, and another. He interviewed victims. He showed documents. He asked questions that no one in the mainstream media had been willing to ask. Within 48 hours, Sterling Tech under investigation was trending nationally. Journalists who had ignored the story for years suddenly found their courage. News vans appeared outside Sterling Tech headquarters. Shareholders started asking uncomfortable questions. The stock dropped 15% in 2 days. On the third day of Elena's psychiatric hold, the pressure became too much. The hospital received calls from news organizations asking why they were holding a pregnant woman against her will at the request of the man she was accusing of murder. The psychiatric hold had been shaky from the start. It was never really meant to commit her. It was meant to silence her, to keep her out of the way while Marcus's lawyers worked their magic. But you cannot silence someone when the whole world is watching. Elena walked out of the hospital on the afternoon of the third day. Ruth was waiting in the parking lot with a car. And a surprise. An older woman sat in the back seat. She was around 60, with silver hair and dignified bearing. Her clothes were expensive but understated. Her eyes were red from crying, but her jaw was set with determination. Elena, Ruth said, this is Margaret Reeves, Daniel's widow. Margaret reached out and took Elena's hand before Elena had even fully sat down. I always knew, Margaret said, I always knew Daniel did not kill himself. I told the police, I told the lawyers, I told anyone who would listen, but no one believed me. They said I was just a grieving widow who could not accept the truth. Elena squeezed her hand. I believe you, I know. I have been watching the videos. Margaret's grip tightened. When I saw what was happening, when I saw that people were finally listening, I knew it was time. Time for what? Margaret's eyes glittered with 15 years of suppressed rage. Daniel was paranoid, she said, for good reason, as it turned out. He did not trust anyone. He did not believe any single person could keep his secrets safe. So he did not just give your father one copy of the evidence. He gave me a different copy, one that no one knows about, one that has been sitting in my attic for 15 years, waiting for this exact moment. They drove to Margaret's house in silence. In her attic, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old photo albums and the accumulated memories of a life interrupted by tragedy, was a fireproof safe. Inside was another tape, another camera, another copy of Daniel's confession. This time they did not go through the legal system. They called a press conference. Elena stood in front of reporters from every major news network. Cameras flashed. Microphones bristled like a forest of metal trees. She was flanked by Margaret and Detective Hayes and a team of lawyers who had volunteered to work pro bono after seeing Tommy's videos. Behind her stood Ruth and Tommy and a dozen other victims who had found the courage to come forward. Elena told the truth, all of it, from the beginning. And then they played the tape. Daniel Reeves's face filled every screen in the country. His voice, preserved for 15 years, finally told the world what had been done to him. By the end of the day, Marcus Sterling was arrested on live television on Mo. The footage of him being walked out of Sterling Tech in handcuffs, his perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face twisted with disbelief, was shown on every news channel in the country. It went viral within minutes. Elena watched from Ruth's living room, surrounded by the people who had saved her life. She cried. Margaret held her hand. It is over, Elena said. We won. Ruth hugged her tight, and then Elena felt something warm and wet spread down her legs. Oh no, she gasped. That is too early. Ruth's eyes went wide. The baby is coming. 3 weeks early. They rushed to the hospital, victory still fresh on their lips. But the fight was not over yet. The hospital was a blur of pain and fear and fluorescent lights. Elena was in labor 3 weeks early. The stress had been too much. Her body had decided it was time. Ready or not, Ruth held her hand through every contraction, her grip strong and steady. Margaret paced the hallway outside, calling Daniel's children to tell them that justice was finally coming. Tommy sat in the waiting room, compulsively refreshing his phone for news updates. Everything was supposed to be over. Marcus was arrested. The truth was out. Elena should have been able to focus on bringing her daughter into the world. Then Detective Hayes burst through the delivery room doors. Elena, she said out of breath, I am so sorry. Marcus made bail. He posted $10 million and he is out. Elena screamed. Whether from the contraction or from the news, she could not tell. What? How? Rich people, Hayes said bitterly. Different rules, but there is more. He filed an emergency motion with family court from the courthouse steps. He is arguing that as the baby's father, he has parental rights. If the baby is born before the motion is resolved, he can legally demand visitation, possibly even temporary custody. No. Elena gasped through another contraction. He threatened to kill me. He cannot. I know. But the court does not have all the evidence yet. The criminal case will take months. If this baby comes tonight, Marcus Sterling will have legal access to your child. Elena lay in the hospital bed, contractions coming faster now, facing an impossible choice. Her body was forcing her to give birth. And if she did, she might lose her baby to a murderer. Then we need to end this tonight, she said through gritted teeth, before the baby comes. Hayes stared at her. What do you mean? I need my phone. Elena, you are in labor. You cannot possibly. I need my phone. They did not want to give it to her. But Elena was nothing if not stubborn. She had survived homelessness, betrayal, psychiatric imprisonment. She had brought down a billionaire from a hospital bed. She could make one more phone call. Between contractions, she dialed a number she knew by heart. Marcus answered on the second ring. Elena. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, still so confident that he could not lose. I heard you are in labor. Congratulations. I look forward to meeting my daughter. She is not your daughter. Elena hissed. She will never be your daughter. The law says otherwise. Marcus chuckled. You know, you almost had me worried for a moment. That press conference was quite dramatic. But money solves everything, Elena. I will beat the criminal charges. I will get custody of the baby. And you will spend the rest of your pathetic life knowing that I won. Elena smiled. Even through the pain, even through the fear, she smiled. Meet me, she said. Sterling Tech Building. 1 hour, just you and me. Marcus laughed. And why would I do that? Because I have something you want. The original video file. The one Daniel gave my father. The one that can send you to prison forever. Margaret's copy was just a backup, a safety net. But the original has metadata, timestamps, proof that cannot be disputed. A long pause. Elena could hear him thinking, calculating. Why would I believe you? Because I am in labor, Marcus. I do not have time to play games. I just want this to be over. I will trade you the file for full custody. You drop the parental rights claim. I drop the criminal complaint. We both walk away. Another pause. 1 hour, Marcus said. Rooftop. Come alone. The line went dead. Ruth grabbed Elena's arm. Her face was horrified. You cannot be serious. You are having a baby. I know. Elena swung her legs over the side of the bed. But if that baby is born while Marcus is free, I will spend the rest of my life fighting him. I will never be safe. My daughter will never be safe. She stood up, swaying slightly. Ruth caught her. I have to end this now. Hayes was already on her phone, calling for backup. Tommy was pulling up building schematics on his laptop. Margaret was praying, her lips moving silently. They had 1 hour. It would have to be enough. The Sterling Tech Building was dark when Elena arrived. Security guards waved her through without checking her ID. Marcus had arranged everything. He thought he was in control. He thought he was luring her into a trap. He had no idea. Elena took the elevator to the rooftop. Each contraction sent waves of agony through her body. By the time the doors opened, she was barely able to stand. But she stood anyway. Marcus was waiting for her. He stood near the edge of the roof, the Chicago skyline glittering behind him. In his expensive suit and perfect hair, he looked like the king of the world. But Elena could see the cracks, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the elevator, the fear hiding behind his confident smile. He was scared. For the first time in his life, Marcus Sterling was truly scared. You actually came, he said. I did not think you would. I am full of surprises. Marcus smiled, that cold, charming smile that had fooled her for 3 years. That had fooled everyone. You know, I did love you once, in my own way. You were real. In a world full of people who wanted something from me, you just wanted me. Then why? Elena asked. Why all of this? Why the lies, the betrayal? Why kill Daniel? Why destroy so many lives? Because I wanted more. I always want more. It is a sickness, Elena, I know that. But knowing does not stop the wanting. Nothing is ever enough. He stepped closer. Give me the original file, and I will let you walk away. Disappear. Raise the baby somewhere far from here. I will not follow, I promise. A contraction hit Elena so hard she doubled over. Marcus watched without moving. Without a flicker of concern. Clock is ticking, he said, literally. Elena slowly straightened up. And then, despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the overwhelming odds against her, she smiled. You know what I learned from my father, Marcus? He frowned, confused, not used to people surprising him. Patience, Elena continued. He was a gardener. He knew that you do not see the results right away. You plant seeds, you water them, you wait, you trust the process. And eventually something beautiful grows. What are you talking about? I have been planting seeds for weeks, and you just stepped right into them. She nodded toward his pocket. Check your phone. Marcus pulled out his phone. The color drained from his face. While Elena was distracting him on the rooftop, Jessica Thorne was executing the real plan. For 2 years, Jessica had been gathering evidence. Not for Marcus, for herself. She had been photographing documents, copying files, recording conversations. She was not his mistress. She was his destruction. Tonight she released everything, every crime, every lie, every dollar stolen, and every person destroyed. Sterling Tech stock was not just dropping, it was in free fall. The board of directors was in emergency session. Marcus's own shareholders were voting him out of his own company. His assets were being frozen. His accounts were being investigated. But that was not the best part. Everything you just said to me, Elena said, is being streamed to the Chicago Police Department, the district attorney, and about 50,000 people watching online right now. She held up her hand. On her finger was a ring that looked like a simple silver band, but embedded in the stone was a camera the size of a grain of rice. Tommy's idea, Elena said. Pretty smart for a guy working at a gas station. Marcus lunged at her. The elevator doors opened. Detective Hayes, police officers, Margaret Reeves, who had insisted on being here to see the man who killed her husband, finally brought to justice. And behind them, Ruth Coleman, who was not about to let Elena face this alone. Marcus Sterling, Hayes said, you are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Reeves, fraud, witness intimidation, and threatening the life of Elena Vance. They dragged him away screaming. Threats, promises of revenge, vows to destroy everyone who had ever crossed him. But the words were empty now. He was empty. And Elena collapsed. The contractions were coming every minute now. The baby, she gasped. The baby is coming. Right now. They rushed her back to the hospital. The birth was fast and intense and terrifying. But at 3:17 in the morning, surrounded by the people who had saved her life, Elena Vance held her daughter for the first time. She was tiny, perfect, screaming at the top of her lungs with a fury that seemed to say, I am here. I made it. And I am not going anywhere. What are you going to name her? Ruth asked, tears streaming down her face. Elena looked at the baby, thought about her father, thought about Daniel Reeves and Margaret and all the people who had been hurt, thought about everything she had survived. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope Vance. Tommy grinned from the corner of the room. Not gonna lie, I was hoping for something cooler, like vengeance or justice. Ruth smacked his arm. Tommy. What? Hope is good too. Very optimistic. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of a small office on the south side of Chicago. The neighborhood was still rough, still struggling, but something new was growing here. The sign above the door read, the Reeves Vance Foundation, supporting survivors of corporate abuse. She held Hope in her arms. Ruth stood beside her, beaming like a proud grandmother. Margaret was cutting the ribbon with golden scissors. Tommy was live streaming the whole thing to his now millions of followers. A reporter pushed forward with a microphone. Mrs. Vance, what would you say to other women who are trapped in situations like yours was? Elena looked into the camera. She thought about all the women who might be watching. Women who felt alone, women who felt powerless, women who had been told they were crazy or paranoid or making things up. I would say you are not crazy, Elena said. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything, every text, every email, every conversation. Write it down. Keep records, because someday you might need them. She shifted Hope to her other arm. Find one person, just one person you can trust. It does not have to be family. It does not have to be a friend. It can be a stranger who looks at you and sees someone worth fighting for. She glanced at Ruth. Ruth wiped her eyes. And remember this, leaving is not failure. Staying silent is not strength. The bravest thing I ever did was ask for help. The smartest thing I ever did was let people give it. She looked down at Hope, her daughter, her future, everything she had fought for. And when they try to make you feel small, when they try to convince you that you are nothing, remember this. She looked back at the camera. Seeds are small too, and they become forests. The ribbon fell. The crowd cheered. Elena walked into her new office, ready to start the next chapter. Behind her, the Chicago skyline stretched toward the sky. In the distance, the former Sterling Tech building stood dark and empty. A for sale sign hung on the front. The name had already been removed from the walls. Marcus Sterling was in federal prison, awaiting trial for murder. His bail had been revoked after his threat to Elena went viral. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Jessica Thorne had disappeared. Her mission was complete. Somewhere, Elena hoped she was living a good life under a new name. Robert Caldwell had been disbarred and was facing his own criminal charges. Every victim he had helped bury was coming forward now. He would never practice law again. And Elena Vance, the gardener's daughter who had once had nothing, had built something that would outlast them all. A legacy of truth, a foundation of hope, and a family forged not by blood, but by the simple act of showing up for each other when it mattered most. The storm had passed, the roots had held, and the harvest was just beginning. And that is how a gardener's daughter proved that the tallest towers fall the hardest, while the deepest roots survive the storm. Marcus Sterling spent his whole life chasing power. He lied. He cheated. He killed. He thought money could buy him anything. But he forgot one thing. Money cannot buy loyalty. It cannot buy love. And it definitely cannot buy the silence of a woman who has nothing left to lose. Elena started this story with $12 and a baby in her belly. She ended it with a foundation, a family, and a future that Marcus Sterling can only dream about from behind prison bars. So let me ask you something. Do you think Marcus deserved a second chance? Or was his fate exactly what he earned? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I love hearing what you think. If this story gave you chills, if you felt that satisfaction when justice finally came, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps this story reach other women who need to hear it. And if you are new here, welcome to the family. We tell stories about karma, justice, and women who refuse to stay down. Hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you never miss when the next one drops. Share this with someone who needs a reminder today. A reminder that being underestimated is a superpower, that asking for help is not weakness, and that seeds are small too, but they become forests. Thank you for staying until the end. I will see you in the next story.